Welcome to Heidegger 1289, and I will start with a little summary before I continue with the article by Smolin, Temporal Naturalism. It's getting clearer and clearer. Temporal naturalism is a condensation of the whole book, The Singular Universe. And although that might seem something that would hinder understanding, it was actually good to have it in a small format. So far I will do some remarks here. The two cosmological fallacies would make no models possible. And the second one, we will have no higher abstract understanding. And three, which is the gravest, and it's a perpetual eroding of math physics. And I've written more, and I would say that includes all strands of knowledge, no exception. It's a rot within knowledge itself. It can only be understood through knowledge and healed through knowledge. But it's extremely important to understand the difference here that is being depicted clearer and clearer by especially Smolin in this case. It's not against use of mathematics in physics. It's on the other hand, on the other side, it's a defense of math and models. And in the view of the multiverse, the math simply is not sane anymore. It is autoimmune. It's like an autoimmune disease eating itself, destroying itself from within. This is an expanded argument that we already heard from Brouwer and Whitcomb, Newcomb, Greenleaf and Kaufman. This is pertaining to all of understanding. By committing the cosmological fallacy, we destroy all understanding or block it out. And I like this. We block it out by the block universe. And now let me go on to the actual lecture. See here. This is a direct continuation of 1288. So any complete explanation for the elementary causal process B and C together cause A must make use of information that distinguishes B and C from all others. So it cannot be a general and simple law of the kind we usually envision governs elementary events. Candidates for such laws are discussed later. If we are willing to have coarse-grained rather than exact laws, then we can speak of classes of events. For example, A is in the class of events that has two immediate progenitors. These classes require much less information to describe than the individual events. Hence, we can have simple laws applying to large classes of events. These may be quite general, applying as they do to large classes of events. So we see that general and simple laws of the usual kind can emerge from a more detailed description by coarse graining, so that they apply to large classes of events. Indeed, nowhere in physics do we have a theory that explains why individual events occur. Most theories with an events ontology are quantum theories, such as Feynman diagram approaches to quantum field theory, according to which every causal history with every possible sets of events and causal relations has an amplitude it contributes to the sum of histories. There are, to my knowledge, no deterministic causal set models. Instead, those causal set models that have been studied take a stochastic or quantum approach to dynamics. They therefore do not attempt to answer the question of why particular causal sets may occur. The only exception I am aware of is the model we develop with Marina Cortes. The Newtonian paradigm from the viewpoint of temporal naturalism. We can summarize the last few points by describing the proper role of the Newtonian paradigm for a temporal naturalist. On cosmological scales, the universe is unique and laws evolve. So the Newtonian paradigm breaks down. On fundamental scales, events are also unique. So the Newtonian paradigm breaks down here also. Events are distinguished by their relational properties and thus must be fundamentally unique. There can be no simple and general laws on the fundamental scale. Repeatable laws only arise on intermediate scales by coarse graining, which forgets information that makes events unique and allows them to be modeled as simple classes which come in vast numbers of instances. Hence, the Newtonian paradigm works only on intermediate scales. We can also see from this that intermediate scale physics must be statistical, because similarity arises from neglect of information. It is interesting to wonder whether this might be the origin of quantum uncertainty. That is, the hidden variables needed to complete quantum theory. If we are to explain why individual events take place, must be relational. They must arise in adding the information needed to distinguish each event uniquely from all others. Note that because the question of distinguishing individual events from others requires a comparison with others. Such relational hidden variables must be non-local. Finally, it may happen that uniqueness might sometimes not wash out on intermediate scales, leading to a breakdown of lawfulness, arising from novel states or events. This idea is developed below as the principle of precedence. Thus, we are left with a compelling and new understanding of the nature of laws. Causality is fundamental and prior to law. The fundamental laws that guide the process of causation, if they exist at all, cannot be both local and simple. All laws that are simple and local must arise from a process of coarse graining. Hence, they are effective and statistical. Given the distinction between laws that govern and laws that describe, they are closer to the latter. Hence, simple and local laws, when they arise, need not be permanent. So there is no barrier to investigating the possibility that they evolve. The evolution of laws. The main advantage of temporal naturalism is that it allows the laws of nature to evolve and, as Charles Sanders Peirce understood already in 1893, this makes possible explanations for why these laws in terms of hypotheses that are falsifiable by doable experiments. As Peirce put it, to suppose universal laws of nature capable of being apprehended by the mind and yet having no reason for their special forms, but standing inexplicable and irrational, is hardly a justifiable position. Uniformities are precisely the sort of facts that need to be accounted for. Law is par excellence the thing that wants a reason. Now the only possible way of accounting for the laws of nature and for uniformity in general is to suppose them results of evolution. The important point is that hypotheses about mechanisms that may have operated in the past to evolve the laws can have consequences for observable phenomena because they are in the past. This point is analyzed in some detail into one, so I will only mention below two specific hypotheses which illustrates the point. The principle of precedence and cosmological natural selection It is, however, worth mentioning that the idea that the laws of nature have evolved has been voiced by some of the great physicists of the 20th century. Paul Dirac put forward his large number hypothesis, according to which the constants of nature evolved, and later wondered about a more general evolution of laws. At the beginning of time, the laws of nature were probably very different from what they are now. Thus, we should consider the laws of nature as continually changing with the epoch, instead of holding as uniformly throughout space-time. Paul Dirac. Even Richard Feynman wondered in an interview whether physics might turn out to be an historical science, the only field which has not admitted any evolutionary question is physics. Here are laws, we say, but how did they get that way? In time. So it might turn out that they are not the same all the time, and that there is a historical evolutionary question. Richard Feynman. Due to experiments partly motivated by the desire to check predictions of Dirac's large number hypothesis, we have good limits on the evolution of a few parameters of the standard model, including G and the fine structures constant alpha. These render it unlikely that the laws have changed much, if at all, in the present era. To explain the present laws through a process of evolution, it therefore might help if the initial cosmological singularity is replaced by a bounce from previous era. This is an old speculation going back to Tolman in the 1930s. But there is recently good theoretical evidence that this is a generic consequence of unifying quantum theory with general relativity. A bounce instead of cosmological singularity is a universal feature of models of quantum cosmology, constructed using the methods of loop quantum gravity. Nor is it new that such cosmological bounces might be moments when the laws of nature change. Feynman's PhD's supervisor, John Archibald Wheeler, speculated that at such events the parameters of the laws of nature might be randomly reshuffled. He called this reprocessing the universe. The defining idea of temporal naturalism is then not presentism. It is that the laws of nature are not timeless, but the result of the process of change. This idea has big consequences which we are only beginning to explore. My collaborator on this project, Roberto Mangabeira Unger, put a provocative challenge before us when he wrote, "You can trace properties of the present universe back to the properties it must have had at the beginning. But you cannot show that these are the only properties that the universe might have had. Earlier or later universe might have had entirely different laws." To state the laws of nature is not to describe or explain all possible histories of all possible universes. Only a relative distinction exists between law-like explanation and narration of one-time historical sequence. If you are asked what you mean by the necessity of the laws of nature, you can legitimately respond only by laying out the substance of your cosmological and other scientific ideas. People who appeal to fixed conceptions of necessity, contingency, and possibility are simply confused. Hooray, hooray, hooray for Unger. Next paragraph. The principle of precedence. I would now like to briefly describe two hypotheses about how laws of nature may change. More about them can be found in the cited references. The key point I want to make is that these hypotheses are testable. This is evidence for my larger claim that by making laws evolvable in ways that are testable, temporal naturalism makes cosmology more scientific than timeless naturalism, which by keeping laws as timeless and immutable also put them beyond explanation by means of testable hypothesis. The first of these ideas is called the principle of precedence. It is an idea about how quantum dynamics might be the result of evolution. Let me begin with an assertion we know is true. If we prepare and measure a quantum system we have studied many times in the past, the response will be as if the outcome were randomly chosen from the ensemble of past instances of that preparation and measurement. Why is this? Usually we think that it is because a timeless law will act in the future as it has in the past. But this is a wild idea. What kind of thing is a law that lives outside of time, but can act in time on every material process? This violates a central tenet of relationalism, which is Einstein's principle of reciprocity, according to which if an entity A acts on an entity B to alter it, then B must be able to act back on A. Besides, how does an electron know it is supposed to follow the electron law rather than the quark law? There is a radical metaphysical idea at work, making the crazy seem obvious. There is a less radical assumption. What was just stated is the only law of nature needed. If we prepare and measure a quantum system, we have studied many times in the past, the response will be as if the outcome were randomly chosen from the ensemble of past instances of that preparation and measurement. We can cross out a few words and simplify this a bit. If we prepare and measure a quantum system we have studied many times in the past, the response will be randomly chosen from the ensemble of past instances of that preparation and measurement. My claim is that this principle may be the only dynamical law of nature. Note how parsimonious this idea is. It gets rid of the metaphysical baggage carried by the conventional view in which there are laws of nature which do not themselves evolve, which however determine the evolution of everything real. The ensemble of past events was real, and properties of it can have present truth values. Hence, nothing unreal or uninfluenceable is reaching into the universe to act on the real. For now, the key point is that this hypothesis is testable because it implies that the evolution of novel quantum states should depart from the usual predictions of quantum dynamics, when those involve only the interactions of the system's components. Our colleagues in quantum information laboratories are learning to work with artificially generated entangled states of many degrees of freedom. These have a combinatorial complexity that makes it unlikely that they have ever been produced naturally in the past. So they have no precedence. I have stated the principle of precedence in an operational language. Clearly, the principle calls out for being embedded in deeper theory. To explain it, we need a fundamental theory in which the present and past are meaningful. The search for such a framework is the subject of current work. But going on, I would like to mention that once again Peirce was here first. All things have a tendency to take habits. For atoms and their parts, molecules and groups of molecules, and in short, every conceivable real object, there is a greater probability of acting as on one former like occasion than otherwise. This tendency is itself constitutes a regularity and is continually on the increase. In looking back into the past, we are looking towards periods when it was a less and less decided tendency. Charles Sanders Peirce, A Guess at the Riddle. Quote ended. Cosmological natural selection. This hypothesis was described in detail in a 1992 paper and in my first book. So I will be very brief here. The idea is to recognize that there is a landscape of physical theories analogous to the landscape of genotypes in population biology, and mimic in a cosmological scenario the formal description of a population evolving on a fitness landscape. The key hypotheses begin by modifying Wheeler's reprocessing scenario. Universes reproduced by black hole singularities bouncing, giving rise to new regions of space-time. At each bounce, the parameters of the laws of physics mutate slightly. Consequently, a typical universe is most likely to come from a parent that had many progeny than few. If our universe is typical, then it is likely that the laws that govern it have been tuned to increase the number of black holes over the numbers produced by typical laws. This implies that the parameters of the standard model are mere values that extermine the production of black holes locally in the parameter space. This explains many of the fine-tunings of parameters of the standard model. This is because to maximize a universe production of black holes to the following. Star formation requires plentiful carbon and oxygen. This explains the first fine-tunings of the electromagnetic and strong coupling constant, as well as the proton, pion and electron masses in order to stabilize these elements. Supernovas require tuning of weak interactions. This explains the tuning of weak interaction scale. Gravity must be very, very weak. This explains the large ratio of the Planck to the proton masses, which is part of the hierarchy problem. In addition, it makes predictions for real observations that have been done in the years since. Two predictions made in 1992 are still standing as described. 1. The heaviest stable neutron star must be less than twice the Sun's mass. Inflation, if true, must be a single field, single parameter. Time and qualia. Now I would like to turn to a new subject, which is the implications of our conception of time for the philosophy of mind. Strawson and Nagel write of the need for naturalism to accommodate qualia or conscious experience as a natural part of the physical world. Here I would like to argue that this is much easier to do in temporal naturalism than in timeless naturalism. I can begin with two basic observations. First, every instance of qualia occurs at a unique moment of time. Being conscious means being conscious of a moment, being ordered and drenched in time is a fundamental attribute of conscious experience. Second, facts about qualia being experienced now are not contingent. There are no facts of the form. If there is a chicken in the road, then I am now experience a brilliant red. It follows that qualia cannot be real properties of a timeless natural world, because all reference to now are contingent and relational. Nor can qualia be real properties of a pluralistic simultaneity of moments, because what distinguishes those moments from each other are relational and contingent facts. Qualia can only be real properties of a world where now has an intrinsic meaning, so that statements about now are true non-relationally and without contingency. These are the case only in a temporal natural world. It has been objected that a naturalist can see the history of the universe having temporal parts with intrinsic qualities. This misses the key point, which is that any reference to one of those timeless parts in a block universe framework must be contingent and relational, whereas our knowledge of qualia are unqualified by either contingency or relation to any other fact. That was the short version of the argument. Here is a longer version. And I think before the longer version, I think it's time to stop. And we take the longer version next. And I say thank you very much. Let's end with a view. You can have a look-see at the geodesic dome, Ferris wheel and World Trade Center. Somewhere there, I think it's a drone flying around. This is how they survey these big construction sites these days. Bye bye.